Welcome, everyone, to this Startup Haven member brief. I'm Bob Crimmins, founder of Startup Haven. The reason we do this is to connect our members with each other in a way that is scalable. We have about 2,500 members now in about 16 cities, and we're growing. And there's just some remarkable people. If you get a room full of founders and investors, you're very likely to find a bunch of remarkable people. And so these member briefs are a chance for us to single some of those folks out and chat with them and learn from them, and then share that with the broader Startup Haven community. So today we're welcoming one of our members, I think a decade or so now, Portland member, Mat Ellis. What I can tell you about Matt, as I'd gotten to know him those years ago, I met Matt around poker, which is how Startup Haven started, as many of you know. And Matt was so generous, and not just in his willingness to share his amazing space with us to host events, but just also in his spirit. He's very good people, and I'm delighted that he's taken some time to share some of his journey with us, some of the lessons he's learned as a highly experienced founder. He also sits on the other side of the table for time as an angel investor, and I'm sure we'll learn a little bit about the way he thinks about startups from a investor or fundraising perspective as well. So without further ado, actually first let me say also, if you do have questions that you'd like to ask Matt, if you can pop those into the Q&A channel or thread. We'll get to those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Matt here up. There he is. Matt, welcome. Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you for taking time. I know time is the most precious asset in the startup ecosystem, and it's a non-trivial thing for somebody to give up some of their time. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, I gave a really terrible intro about you, and I want to give you a chance to make that right. Share a little bit about how you ended up where you are, including the fact that you are a Brit. If you say 10 words, everybody will see that immediately. But share a little bit about how you got here, not just to the US and to Portland, but how you got into the startup ecosystem.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, thanks. It's great to be here and share all the hiccups we had along the way. I think we learned a lot more from studying our errors than from telling how we were so great. So hopefully we can share some learnings. It's too late for me. You can all still save yourselves. So I think that's my motto. My background, I got a scholarship to go to Hogwarts when I was a kid for smart kids causing problems in government schools. Margaret Thatcher sent me to a boarding school. And the thing about boarding schools is they're pretty intense. You start at 8 o'clock in the morning, you finish at 6. Victorian labour laws meant that our holidays were twice as long as the regular government schools. So I'm at home with nothing to do, and all my friends are at school. So that's how I started my go in computers. And my mother was a programmer, my aunt was a programmer. And so I had a little bit of knowledge, and I ended up pirating video games for the local video store. And as that got harder, the guy who owned it, Trevor, he gave me some things to try and get around the copy protection. And so I learned enough to start writing video games as a teenager. And so, I'm 14 years old. I did some arcade conversions and got paid pretty good on it. I enjoyed it. My special trick was to finish the games. Lots of us not able to finish anything. And this led to some friction. My dad was a little older gentleman and threw me out at 16. And being at Hogwarts, I finished school a year early, but couldn't go to university, and started a computer games company, which failed terribly 2 years later when 2 of my staff stole everything out of the office. So I'm 19 and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and stuck. And it was a pretty shitty experience. I worked through it. I had a crappy job during the week, but I started working in France at weekends, long story, but I'd sell computers to French companies and then use the money to buy alcohol and cigarettes and sell it back in the UK as a cross-channel smuggler almost. It was a good time to do it. There wasn't any government scrutiny because we were about to open all the borders, so everyone just let you through. And I helped pay down the debt. And I was pretty bitten from the experience of a failure. And I fell into some great work at great companies like Goldman Sachs and PepsiCo, traveling and installing great big systems all over the world. The 90s were a great time for post-Soviet fall, for people like you and me to go and to places like Poland and Russia and South Africa and deploy these great big systems, planet-wide networks. It was really enjoyable work, very well paid. But I still had that itch. I still wanted to do a startup. And as the startup boom of the 90s proceeded, I didn't understand it. I just couldn't see how these companies would ever make money. And I'm making this conversation up, but it's like, hey, two founders have raised 10 million pounds. They're looking for a CTO, and they're going to sell cat food to people in Africa over the internet. And I'd be like, how does that work? And they go, well, you'd be the CTO, you'd have to figure that out. And then when the bus came, it was really obvious what I could do. And I did 2 turnarounds for British Telecom, which were great companies that had been poorly managed, and we needed to get them into shape and sell them off. And the second one, they ended up paying me to go on holiday for 6 months. In England, in Europe, you don't have non-competes, everything called garden leave. So when you sign up your contract as an executive, you commit to not working for 6 months after you leave, and they pay you, right? So I was on garden leave and I went fishing in Idaho and drove to the coast, and I wanted to drive down the Pacific coast in an open top car like the movies. And I got lost and ended up at a rodeo and met a girl who's now my wife, and we have 3 children, which is why I live in Portland. So that's how I came to Portland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Gardening
Gardening
is
leave,
that
yeah.
still a thing? Is that still a thing?
Yeah. Clause 7, garden leave. And when you do references, you check that, has this guy ever violated a garden leave? The idea is that the knowledge of customers and process you have has kind of faded a little bit, and you won't just walk out of one into the other. And that was my first time at the rodeo, and my last time. I'm not really keen on what they do to the animals to make them jump about. But anyway, so I did the turnarounds. Turnarounds are hard work. There's a lot of people's passion and lives we put into it, and you're lopping off limbs of it. And I saw it. I was in Australia at one of the offices, and there's a dumpster full of paper, and each sheet of paper represented about 15 minutes of someone's life. And so it was like really depressing to throw it all out in a bid to save the company. I was good at it, but it was a bit unhappy work. So my next company was a high growth startup in California, in Mountain View on Castro, and Castro down there, where now Google's taken over that whole area. Google was still a little company in those days. And we grew from 25 to 350 employees in 2 years. And it was early days in ad tech. We were basically selling $10 bills for $5 and paying $2 wholesale for them because people were undervaluing ad inventory. So it was an easy business to grow. And I learned a lot about the dynamics. So taking a company from 350 to 50 is a turnaround. Taking it from 25 to 350 is a high growth. And the dynamics of humans are very interesting at different sizes, and the lessons you learn about running an organization at all those levels, and the things that go wrong, the things that go right. And then I got poached away to a company in Missouri that we did the same thing. We went from 50 to 350 in 2 years. So I did 2 high growths. By that time, I had 2 little kids, third on the way. Wife needed to come back to Portland to be in the family, get more help. Being a startup exec, I wasn't always there. And so we came back to Portland, and 2 months later, I'm taken to hospital with a terrible infection from an old injury from falling down some stairs. And I can't work for 5 months. I have no health insurance, $125,000 worth of hospital bills. I'm getting pretty liquid at this point. And so I do an old trick. And if any of you ever run out of money, this is a great trick, right? So at the Missouri company, we'd had a problem in our data center that meant we had to go onto the cloud. We went onto the cloud not because we were cool kids, not because we knew it was the great thing, because we had to, right? And so I wrote 50 people on LinkedIn saying, I'm going into this business. If a customer needs a reference, would you be willing to give me a reference? Now, this is a much better way of saying, can you give me some work? Which is what I was really saying. And 3 people said, oh, are you doing that? Can you do that for us? So that's how I got 3 relatively close, favorable buddies to give me good terms, pay up front, and solve my liquidity crisis. And that summer, I went around getting people onto the cloud. And then the bill started to hit. Now, the problem with the cloud is, with the data center, when you don't have enough computers, your systems go slow. And you've got to get down on your knees in front of the CFO and beg for more money. And she goes, no, make it work. And everyone has to put up with a slow system, or you have to turn off some features on this. On the cloud, you just get a bigger bill, and it's much harder to contain. And so my buddies kept calling me, asking for what's the spending, and it became a pain. I couldn't charge them because they were my buddies and they'd done me a favor. So I wrote a system that scraped the bill and sent it to them in an email every day, and they stopped calling. Right. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get back to my ad tech startup ideas I had. And then I go to Iceland on a contract. I turn off my phone to save money. I'm still rather poor. And when I come back, my voicemail is full of angry calls from people I don't know, because these emails were getting forwarded around and they'd failed. Amazon had changed something, my scraper had broken. And then I thought, and one CFO, she said, we're not going to pay you for your work over here unless you restore this service. I'm sure it's in our contract. No, it's not. It's a courtesy from me. But she was so mad at me. And I thought people really care about this and wondered why. And then I realized that all the cloud is something that happens in every technical thing in the last 200 years. It used to be hard to install a computer and keep it working. And so the problem was, how do we do computers? Then it became easy to set up a computer. Now you can sell it as a service. The problem is how much computer to put in my business. It's a supply chain problem. So like rubber, you can't make a car without rubber. You can make wooden wheels, but you've got to have rubber bushings and hoses. And when they solved the problem of synthetic rubber, companies like Ford stopped running rubber plantations. They used to own rubber plantations to make sure they got the right amount of high quality rubber. Now the problem is how much rubber goes in my car. And it's what they call in supply chain language, inputs and outputs problem. It's not just margins. It's like capabilities, competitive advantage, velocity of sales, all these things, all right? So you can do a PhD in it called operations research. And the cloud is even worse. It's instant, infinite, invisible, and it's perishable. So if you order 2 minutes rubber, you use it over the next year. You order 2 minutes computers, it's gone. That moment's gone, right? So I decided to start Cloudability. The only problem was I had no money and I had 3 children under 3. So I was mulling this over, and as I came to that, I tried out the idea by doing a landing page, and we had 3,000 people sign up in a week. And when I talk to investors, because I've been through, now this is one bit of good luck I had working in California, I knew investors. And at this time, the only place in the country you could reliably raise money was in the Bay. And we were very lucky. This was helped by others. The first of lots of help we've had. At that time, a few companies here in Portland had just raised some money. And people were starting to pay attention. Companies like Puppet and Jive and others, I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but there were 3 or 4 companies that raised $5 to $10 million. And suddenly investors were taking it seriously in Portland rather than thinking you're out in the boonies. Okay, we were cool suddenly. And so the reaction from one investor, he organized a breakfast with 7:15 in the morning for 15 minutes. And 3 hours later, we came out with the pitch deck, and I knew I had to do this. And the only problem was this landing page, the local guy I've been working with, I showed him the landing page, and I'm an engineer. So it was really good for an engineer. It was not very good for a creative. He said, give me a couple of days alone with this, will you? And I did. He came back so good, I had to have him on board. The only problem was his wife was about to have twins. So between 3 co-founders, we have 5 children under 3 and 3 children under 3 months. So I waited for him to come home from the hospital. That day, I pounced him with a bottle of champagne to celebrate the birth, but to actually persuade him to join us. And the next day, we formed the company and went ahead. Now, we saw the problem of funding, and I raised about $250,000 from friends and family. I raised it every month. Another check came in. Didn't raise all at once, open round. And one of my technical family moved out from California and lived in my house. And we paid ourselves a peppercorn, and we had an order. And John, who lived in the house, he'd be last to get paid if we couldn't pay. We managed to make enough to pay. And we launched the product, and it was pretty popular. People loved it. They loved knowing what their thing was, particularly the daily email. And then in November of the year, we were approached by Techstars. Now, we all know about accelerators today, but in those days, it felt a bit dodgy. They want 6% company, then we'd come live in Texas for 3 months. We've got all these babies up here in Oregon. We can't move our families. And we went down there to see them, and we really liked. Jason was the managing director. They had one of the founders at Rackspace there, and the chairman. The chairman spent a couple of weekends trying to persuade us to apply, and we applied. And boy, Techstars was a real accelerator. And Techstars basically makes you do 18 months of strategic planning, 3 months, and you go on stage in 6 minutes to describe business. They just sharpened up everything they did. And a month after, Techstars raised $7.5 million in a Series A by guys at Foundry with Jason Mendelson and Brad Feld and others. And oh my God, they were amazing. And of course, Techstars and Foundry are like this, all right? They're both in Boulder. For those who don't know either, they're both in Boulder. Foundry were a really exceptional group of people. If you Google I'm a VC by Foundry Group on YouTube, they made these funny songs about what it was like to be an investor. They were just really different. And I liked having a main investor that was outside of the Valley. We got lots of bites from people like Kleiner and Lightspeed and all these folks, but these folks just seemed more like us. And we're off to the races. So now we've got 3 customers, $80,000 of revenue. And over the next 2 years, we multiply revenue by 42 times. and we multiplied the data size by 150 million, and we choked. So this is the problem with the staff, are either starving or choking. And there was about a 2-week period one summer where I thought we might have to turn off the business for a week or two to catch up with the processing, and a 2-year period where we were basically rebuilding our business on the fly, losing customers. The guy who brought the beautiful page in was our customer kit guru, and his team bound the business together, and we figured it out. We scaled up, and then in 2019 we sold to Apptio, who are based in Bellevue. Some of you might know them, and we were great. We're a combination made in heaven. And last summer, IBM bought the combined entity for $4.5 billion. And as a success story for Cloudability, well, you're owned by IBM. You're still growing like a weed, and they still call it Cloudability. I think that's a pretty satisfying outcome. That's the fact story. There's a whole different story for what was going on behind the scenes there, but that's the arc of where I am right now. And today I run a company called 60 AI. I'm an investor, and I love startups. I've got at least another 2 of me after this one. I got ideas in certain areas, and the thing I really enjoy is not just building machines, but building groups of people.
That's awesome. Thank you. I learned a lot about you that I didn't know. Thank you for sharing all that, Matt. And now let's dig into some of the behind the scenes, not the factual story,
right,
but the shit that was hard, the shit that broke,
yeah.
like that stuff. It's easy to find people talking about how to do things right. Yeah. And folks who we were talking about this earlier, sort of navigated the minefield, ended up coming out as the one who now gets to talk about success and tell everybody who's trying to navigate minefields how they did it. I'm very, very interested to hear the things that you learned going through that minefield that you think are applicable to other founders who are navigating their own minefields. Survivor bias is a real thing. Yeah. And I love talking to entrepreneurs who achieved some success, but also had a ton of just crap happen. And that's the stuff that they mostly want to talk about too. Like they'll do the interview and they'll write the blog, but here's the thing, and they'll speak at a conference on a panel or whatever. But the most interesting stuff to me is that other stuff. So you have so much of it. I'm not even going to add. Tell me what you think is the most interesting, compelling, valuable stuff that you learned going through all those experiences.
So I've learned that most founders are founders and not employees for a reason. And that reason can be pretty negative. There's something that's inside of them that makes them want to prove themselves or run away from something or accomplish something. And for me, it was my relation with my father. My father was an orphan. This is crazy. This is really fucked up. My father was born in 1915. I was the office affair baby. He was in his late 50s when I was born. His father died in 1915 in World War I in a gas attack. So my father was brought up as an orphan. And if you've ever met orphans, many orphans, when you're a kid and you fail, your parents pick you up and go, don't worry, at least you tried. But when you're an orphan, you think all the failure is, some orphans, not all of them, but many orphans think all of their failures are down to their personal weakness. So when they're parents, they can be a bit strict, and because they don't want their kids to fail because of their kids' weaknesses. So my father never said a positive word to me. When I won that scholarship, when I got contracts, when I started a business at 15, it was all negative. And for him, it was like, if I give you any encouragement, then you will fail because you'll go easy on yourself, right? And so my lifelong goal was to get his approval. Now, he died 30 years ago next month, so in September, all right? And even after he died, I was still trying to get a score on the board that he could not deny. And I've made more money than anyone I can find in my family tree, all right? But when you get there, it doesn't fucking matter. It's like, why was I chasing? It's like the dog chasing the postal van, and when it stops, you go, what am I going to do now, right? So that was what was driving me for the first bits. But I also had another thing, because the fear of that first failure was very deeply seated. It was a terrible time. I mean, there was one time when a police officer came to my door because my girlfriend and I weren't living together anymore, but she hadn't paid her tax. There was this poll tax in the 80s you might have heard about. There were riots and people weren't paying it, and you had to pay the poll tax of people you live with. If they couldn't find them, they find you. And I'm in front of her straight, and she's mad that out of 250 something people, only 3 of us turned up. And she says 7 days to pay or 7 days in jail, and I've got no money at all. So I have to go down to the docks and do casual work at the docks for cash to get the money out there. It's like, there's moments like this, and you're a teenager, and you've got this massive debt on you, and you just don't know who's going to come knocking at the door next. So I had the fear of failure, and I had the fear of my dad's criticism, but the drive to kind of get there for that. And it took a while to get my game together. So the first step was to go back into startups. I could do that because I was financially sound from the work I'd done in the 90s. But the thing that really lit the blue touch paper was having children. And so there's this kind of ego thing where it wasn't enough for myself to do it, but for my children, I wanted to provide a success for them. However, that meant that in the first few years of starting Cloudability, I was running from a place of fear, which resulted in hiring people who were fearful, and you didn't know whether I was fearful or inspirational. So one day you come to me with a screw up, and I would go, oh, all right, we'll do this. And another day I'll go, because one day I was fearful, the next day I was visionary. Okay. Now, this is where the Foundry guys come in. And the Foundry guys, they don't invest anymore. They're shutting the fund down. They've had great success, 15 years. But they cared about their people. And so did Techstars to a degree. All right. And so the people who needed the most help got the most help, rather than the people who were the most successful got the most help. And Brad Feld invited me to go to a thing called a boot camp. Now, this was the first boot camp at the top of a mountain in Colorado. And you're there with 12 or 15 other CEOs, represent other businesses. And you turn up on a Wednesday night and you go on a Sunday afternoon. I've done 4 of these now, but the first one was the most impactful. And I get a bit emotional when I talk about this, so apologies if I pause. But so we go to dinner and we're all 25%. So 25% is when you're with another CEO and you add 25% to all of your numbers. And anything that's happening in the future, you use the current tense. So you're planning to do this. No, we are doing this. Okay. So we're all bullshitting each other over dinner. And of course, I turn up and I know half of these CEOs and I look up to them. I think, oh God, I must be the smallest, shittiest, most failing company here. This is called imposter syndrome, where you think that if people really found out how shit you were, they would be at the gates because pikes and torches to burn you down, right? So we go into the room to have our first session with this guy called Jerry Colonna. Now, Jerry's famous trick now is to make people cry in public. He made a CNN reporter cry live on air, right? So we're all feeling a bit nervous. We don't know that's his trick because he's not famous for it yet. This was the first time we've met Jerry. And underneath each seat is a letter that we've written each other. Now, they've anonymized them, they've reprinted them, and we don't know who they're from. And we read out the letters we wrote to each other. Only I didn't read the instructions, right? So I read the instructions as write a letter to the other CEOs. The next line below says about how hard it is to be a CEO, the challenges face your company, right? So everyone's letter's like, do you struggle with this? Blah, blah, blah. And mine's like, how you doing? How can I help you? Can you buy my products? Can I buy yours? You know? And there's a laughter that goes around. So I'm feeling even more, oh, crap, I'm fucking this up, you know? And then Jerry goes, so how are we doing? You could cut the air to tension. And so I crack a joke. I say, am I the only one about to have a panic attack here? And he jumps up and he crouches down in front of me. This is now known as Crouching Jerry, because he's about to pull your heart out, show it to you, and turn it around the right way and stick it back in. And I began to cry. And I cried more that evening than the whole of my life up to that time. And then I look up and everyone else is crying or trying not to cry. And we're off to the races because now we're all completely authentic and safe. And then we reenact for the next 4 days that movie Predator, where he jumps from one strong man to the next. You know, he rips out their spines and he's going from one CEO to the next, making each of us crack. The last guy cracked on Sunday morning. It was a bad one. And then we leave the boot camp, and what we left behind was our fear. And suddenly, I'm not fearful anymore. Excuse me. And that changed my life. And so suddenly, I'm not afraid of failing. And when you run a company trying to win instead of trying not to lose, it's a completely different experience. And that's what made Cloudability not fail. Now, what made it succeed was that allowed us to up our game on who we try to have hire for us. It allowed us to up our goals. We got a much closer relationship with the people at Foundry, because now instead of managing them and trying not to tell them the things that are going wrong, we're sharing the problems. They're connecting us with people left and right. And we solved all our problems magically over the next couple of years and began to enjoy running the company instead of worrying all the time about how we're going to break it. And for me, that was the make and break moment that makes me comfortable running new startups or getting involved in invest other ones, is the fact that I don't worry about what's going to happen when I trip up, because you are going to trip up. And, depending how you count it, Cloudability is my 5th or my 7th startup. You have to try again. You need some luck. You need some opportunity. You need hard work and skill and tenacity and fortitude. But you really have to understand that it doesn't really matter if you fail. It's not failing until you stop trying, but everyone's going to make these errors. You're going to learn from them, and you're going to pick yourself up and keep going. And that changed everything.
So thank you, Matt, for sharing that. It's incredible to hear you talk about that. And that's, of course, epic. Boot camp with the founder. That's epic and life-changing for you. Have you thought since then, I'm sure you have, for founders who don't have Foundry as an investor, don't have Techstars as an investor, like, is there a facsimile? Is there another way for them to achieve some of that breakthrough that you had through that very unique and epic experience? It was so formative for you, so impactful for you. If a founders, which the vast majority of founders are not going to be invested in by a firm like Foundry, and they're not going to be Techstars graduates. How do you help another founder figure some of that stuff that you figured out?
Yeah, good question. Really good question. So I don't think this is an easy answer, but there's a whole bunch of stuff we can try. All right. Therapy is a great thing, right? Everyone should be in therapy. The best athletes don't do it without a coach. If you're going to win, get some help. Because it's always easier to process it with some people around you. Another way is you work in groups like this, where people are honest and authentic and turn up. And I went to a week at a business school in Michigan, sponsored by KPMG for CEOs of certain businesses. And there were 3 groups of CEOs. There were those who were too busy and kept missing sessions. There were those who every time, like the founder of JetBlue, and who was, by the way, also running the Top Gun school for a few years, would talk, and then they stand up and add a bit about how they do it even better at their company, right? But then there was another faction led by a guy called Shane Mays, who runs a company called Onshore Offsourcing, something like this, where he gets people from remote towns to work for people like AT&T on coding. And his first question to me was, what problems are you facing right now? And was very candid about the challenges that he had, right? So if you can seek out people who are genuine and trying to talk about this, that helps. But also Reboot have a website with 280 podcasts of people like me talking about this imposter syndrome, their own problems. And that can go a long way to normalize that what we're doing, we're not alone. And the fundamental thing that, once you stop being afraid, you can start asking for help. And so if you can try and find a network of people, do you know what, as an engineer, where this thing called rubber ducking, where you talk through a problem you're not getting to a rubber duck and explaining it to the rubber duck. My mother was a COBOL programmer and I was coding in machine language. But when I explained to her these problems, just to get it down to a level she could understand, I'd think it through and clear it up, right? When you talk to someone who you trust, you hear the problem in your own voice, but with a filter. And the filter of the up and down bullshit, the bullshit that you're telling us this is okay, or the bullshit they're telling us it's not okay. And it helps you clarify. It's a form of reflection. So even having a trusted friend who might not know anything about what you're doing, who you can talk problems through with, you will get there. And this is the fundamental point about psychology. We know what to do. For some reason, it's hard to do it, okay? So the more you talk about it, Tony Robbins talks about envisioning. All you're doing is you're normalizing that this actually should happen and you can do it. So if you can find networks of people who you can trust, obviously, you're not going to put on Twitter, oh, I'm feeling really shit today, I'm feeling really depressed. But just saying to a friend, I'm feeling really down today. And they don't go, well, you need to do this. They go, oh, I'm sorry, what's that feel like? And they sit with you in your pain. It can really help you feel better. It can really help you get yourself up when you need to get up the most. So reboot.io website, other podcasts like it. BetterHelp helps you find a therapist quite cheaply. In your local town, there'll be investors who will refer you to very good but quite expensive CEO coaches. I'm happy to refer. I know a couple of CEO coaches if you need a referral. People are in the Northwest. There's Jerry, of course, but like if you don't have that kind of money, and Jerry's boot camp is about $12,000 plus you have to get there, and they do them in Italy and in Colorado. So get a week off, $12,000, you can go do it. But there are other systems. I'm sure there are other people like Jerry. There used to be a guy called David Berger. He's climbed Mount Everest 7 times, and he's retired now, but he was also based in Colorado. There are other Jerrys out there, and your investors might know them. And by the way, talking to your investors are selling you a product with an interest rate on it that's so high it would be illegal if it was a credit card. Borrowing $12 million on your card at 25% is actually cheaper than taking it from the big investors. So thinking about your investors as a kind of expensive product might help you think about investors who can do more than just lend you the money. And taking reference from other firms have invested in about, are they supportive or are they yelling at you, can be a real help. And the people who are supportive have generally got some pretty good networks for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. And in Portland, we're in Seattle. I used to come down to Portland quite a lot for the events that we did down there, and I got to know the ecosystem and the people in it. I felt fairly well, and there's not a single soul that I think I could find in Portland who would have an ill word to say about you, and instead would be grateful for, as I said before, your spirit, the way, and it comes through, Matt, listening to you talk. You have done a lot for folks in Portland, and I just want to pick your brain. And I've talked to Rick about this a little bit.
For the audience, who's Rick?
Yeah, Rick Turcosi.
Yeah, Rick is Portland's Bob Crimmins.
Well, that's high praise. I'm grateful for that. And yet, when I think of Portland, I think of you and I think of Rick, or I think of Rick and then I think of you. No offense.
No, that's right.
But you were there at that time where there were some companies that raised some money, and all of a sudden Portland showed up on the map, and it achieved some really interesting trajectory, and then it didn't, and then it felt like it came back for a minute, and then it didn't, and it sort of ebbs and flows. Can you give us your take, like help us understand Portland, and how we should think about Portland as a startup innovation hub? What's the character there? And for myself personally, and I talked to some, I won't drop names, other people in Portland about ways that we can try to help Portland. I love Portland. It was a tremendous group of founders that were part of Startup Pave and still are, but it's waning, and I'm trying to navigate that. Give us your take.
Yeah. So, by the way, the answer to this is not clear, and all these things are my opinions, and some people might disagree with some of this, but I'm not saying this is truth. This is how I see it. The first thing is that the real truth about Portland is the most successful startups have been those that dominate a very arcane space, right? So if you're doing, secure storage of legal documents or compliance for this particular niche, those are the businesses that have sold for hundreds of millions of dollars and are still owning those spaces, okay? The ones that try and compete with Facebook and Google and Apple and we're going to build a better car, they've all failed because there's a lack of capital in the area. There's also a bias, which is Hewlett-Packard used to have huge operations in Oregon. They're all gone now. They used to build all their laser printers and do all their R&D there. Intel still have some fairly significant R&Ds. And to show you that there's an area where all their stuff is up in a place called Hillsborough, which is about 20 miles to the west of Portland. And until 2 years ago, the world's largest Costco was in Hillsborough. Yeah. So it's interesting. There's that kind of cluster of people who've got lots of money and consuming. And then, of course, our big kahuna is Portland is the Silicon Valley of sportswear. Nike is founded there, but we have the global or national headquarters for every single major outdoor provider in the world. Adidas, North Face, Under Armour, all of the Columbia, they're all based in Portland or around there. And these dominate the type of checks that you're going to write. So, for example, Cloudability is a B2B business. And the type of people who wrote me checks locally were all B2B. They knew it. They could see this is a real business. But if you want to do a B2C business, there's not much there. All right. And this affects how much connection, the density of connection. And a good example is we bought a company in San Francisco, and I used to stay at the W and walk the 4 blocks to the office. And many days that walk would take me 40 or 50 minutes because of the number of people I bump into and have a chat. which you just don't have that density for B2C in Portland. All right. So if I'm a sportswear guy walking around downtown, I'm going to walk into someone I know in the sportswear industry. If I'm a B2B guy and I go to an investor event or a startup event, I'm going to meet half a dozen people who've helped me or I've helped them. So that's another bias. The third thing is, with smaller towns like Portland's a much smaller space than Seattle. There's no room for assholes. So if you're a sociopath, if you're a liar, if you're a cheater, if you just mistreat people, if you're just an arrogant son of a gun, people will know. And so that has a upside and a downside. The upside is everyone wants to help. The downside is no one wants to speak ill of anyone who is breaking the rules, right? In a bigger space, like the Valley or Seattle, you have to be a bit wary because you're more likely to run into someone who might take advantage of your help, your good nature. You tell them the idea you're working on, suddenly they're working on it. And if they do that in Portland, you're just not going to get invited to things. People will know, okay? So, and then lastly, it's small. It's small. You know, there's not a lot of money here. The money that is here is all old money from, we had a woman try and run for governor. Her family owned the headwaters of the Willamette River, like that old money, made from trees and farming and minerals and stuff like this, right? So, you know, the reason why it succeeded was we could hire people without bringing up the Google money truck because they wanted to live in Portland. And they wanted to live in Portland because for a brief moment, we had a city that wasn't particularly political. It had some great public amenities. It had a spirit that were going to try and compromise these things. And then the rest of the world caught up with us. And we got there by just pure good luck. If you really want to see what Portland used to be like, go watch My Private Idaho, which is mostly filmed in Portland. And when I first came to Portland in 2001, there was an area called the Pearl that I wouldn't park my car in it. And now it's got all these trendy bars and offices, and the government had a really good scheme that private money paid for that, but they allowed it, the tax was allowable because they gave people the right for a 25-year period to build something on this plot of land. So here's a car park, but I'm buying it at this inflated rate because I could turn it into a hotel at any time in the next 25 years. It was a really clever private partnership. And now the government seems to be, I know a lot of the cool thing about Oregon is everyone knows you. All right. So this is not a boast. Most of the politicians would know me by sight. And that gives you some conversations, not much influence, but some insight. And a good example, Oregon keeps gilding the lily. So a good example is COVID vaccination cards. In Washington, you text a number from the number that you put when you got the vaccination, and they'll text back to your QR code. You can download your card. In Oregon, that was considered not HIPAA compliant. So now you got to fill in a paper form and send it off to Oregon. There's 50 people in a room who are so backlogged, they just send every card out without checking it. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of chip money for investors. Oregon's one of 3 states in the union where we've not given it out yet because they can't find a way to do it legally. All right. And so there's this kind of moribund. I've run businesses in Washington and Oregon, and in Washington I had a person I could call up and talk about things, and she could just fix stuff. And in Oregon, it's like a maze of dial this and wait in a line. And it's not that people don't care as much. It's just the bureaucracy seems to be a little duller, a little more inefficient, which also slows down things like government programs, government help, the ability to work with the city to do things. There's all these empty buildings. Let's put some startups in them. Let's suspend taxes for my second most biggest expense, third after payroll and healthcare is local taxes. And if I could defer those for a year or two, I could hire another person. Having that conversation is really hard to get things done right now. And so that's just bung everything up. And then all the politics of COVID and Donald Trump and BLM came into play, when that just basically atomized any sense of civic togetherness we had. And there are people who are saying, that's it, I'm out of here. And there are people leaning in trying to help it. And actually, if you go downtown today in Portland, it's much better, much better than it was. And, you know, the new governor's doing a lot of good work to try and just get things back on the way they were before COVID. And I think we'll get back there. But right now, it's still
down there. My last trip down there, I think I was down there last year, mid-year, and I was sad because I knew Portland before the turn, and it's encouraging to hear that things are improving. I can't wait to make another trip down there.
It's slowly improving, but it's so
right,
stark. Yeah. It's so stark. Have you seen that movie Hot Fuzz with Simon Pegg from Shaun of the Dead?
Yeah.
Where he's a policeman in this little town, and they say for the greater good, and they disappear anyone who's a problem. Right? Yes. We're now joking about where have all the people who are homeless gone? Like they've just thrown them in a big hole because obviously they have not, right? I'm genuinely,
Yeah,
we have 4,500 homeless people. It's like, where have they gone? It's that different. So something's going right.
that's interesting. So you mentioned something that I want to get your take on, and I hear this from time to time. It somewhere between infuriates me and baffles me when I hear founders, some investors too, founders more often I think than investors, but some investors too. They'll say that look, to be successful as a startup founder, you got to be an asshole. Like if you're an asshole, like
Yeah.
+1 for you, right?
Mhm.
Sociopath, good. Like if you're
Yeah.
loud and obnoxious and you don't treat people well, that's somehow a sign that the cut of your jib is just right to be a
Yeah.
successful breakout founder. And I know I've been at this 20 almost 25 years. I know so many founders that I admire so much. They're good people. You're in that list, Matt,
Thank
and
you.
they've done great things. And there are great founders who are great people. And then there's some that they do Netflix documentaries about them, and we idolize the assholeness of it. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I think that there's a very thin layer of super successful, incredibly talented people who are assholes, and they could get away with it because they were right. So if you're going to be an asshole, you better be right, because if you're wrong, A, no one's going to tell you it's going wrong. B, no one's going to help you pick up the pieces, right? There's a great story with Steve Jobs giving the first iPod, and he's saying it's too big. And they're like, Steve, we can't get it any denser. And he's too big, it's too big. And finally he gets up, and there's a fish tank in the room, and he throws the iPod it's a $5 million prototype in the fish tank and goes, bubbles, and walks out the room, right? Now, if you or I would do that, there would be a 50-50 chance there were no bubbles, and we were wrong, and there's no space in there. Okay. So if you're that good, you can get a bit more done when you just go through it. Okay. And when I worked at Goldman Sachs, there was a phrase you'd hear sometimes. I never heard it to me. It was called JFDI, just effing do it, right? Which meant stop complaining about the problems and get it done. And when there was that little bit of pushback, it was amazing what people could do, because the next conversation after JFDI was you're fired. Okay. So there was a little bit of steel in that. Okay. But I think that there's the people who write code by Googling and copying things out of Stack Exchange. And there are people who understand the fundamentals. And I think that asshole rule is done by the Stack Exchange people who see some people making difficult decisions. For example, we have a phrase in England: a little bit of rudder far from the rocks saves a lot of rudder on the rocks, which is when you're on a boat and you're heading towards the rocks. If you turn away a little bit now, you'll miss the rocks. I think the American version is hard decisions, easy life, easy decisions, hard life. Okay. So as a business person, I feel like I spend most of my career trying to persuade people to accept hard truths. There's just not enough money to do that. This person's just not good enough. We have to replace them, right? Now, doing that with respect for relationships, for humans, is difficult. It takes more skill as a manager, and it has tremendous outcomes. Today, on Slack, there's a group of about 150 ex-Cloudability employees. We still talk to each other 5 years after I left the company. I had drinks last night with 2 of them. There's a bond there, but you have to leader. So my background, my dad was ex-military. I tried to join the military. I always thought I was going to be a pilot. And in the military, you create cohesion by filtering out people not pulling their weight. So there's constant training and assessment. And if you're not good, eventually you have to go, particularly in a small volunteer force like the UK's forces. And if you don't have, if you have some freeloader, the cohesion goes away, everyone for themselves. And so you hold everyone to a high standard, but you believe they can get there because training them, you're supporting them. When there's a screw up, the response is, how do we help you not do that again? How do we equip you? And when there's not screw ups, you go, how do we make you better? We would say to people at Cloudability, when you join us, I can't promise you're going to make millions, because that's a bit of luck in the air. But we can promise if you put your back into it, you'll grow. And our goal is that you leave here, it's for a job that's twice the salary you left the job before you came to us, or I'm writing your first check for a startup. Because we want you to ask why, not to challenge, but to understand. And understanding that rule behind it is really important. And I think it's just easier as a manager to I don't want to hear them. I don't want to hear the nuance. Go. Now, at the same time, communicating to people about how we work together, what accountability is, requires consistency, it requires effort, it requires attention. And I would spend about half of my time as a CEO making sure my leaders were the right leaders and that what they said was going on was going on. So, for example, I had a colleague, and I think very highly of her. She did very well with us. But I would ask her a question, and she'd give me 2 minutes of context before she answered the question. And I had to coach her to say, please give me the answer. And then if I need the context, I will ask for it. And now that takes a bit of effort from me instead of going, oh, stop talking, just get to the point, you know? And I think when you're under pressure, particularly when you are struggling, that it's easy to blame others. It's easy to think that they're the problem. It's easy to snap. It's hard to be patient. It's hard to practice patience and understanding. And one bit from the boot camp guys that really helped, I did a day. They said this is the first year of a psychology degree in one day. And the thing, this is the thing I think I use the most. I've learned as an entrepreneur. Nobody, and this might be weird for you on the audience. I'm happy to have a chat offline if you really don't understand this, but nobody in the world is irrational. A schizophrenic guy who attacked a fellow passenger on a bus and killed them, thinking that it was a demon going to eat the children on the bus. What they did was completely rational and very brave, because they genuinely thought that this person was a demon, was going to eat the children on the bus. The problem with irrational acts is their worldview. So when people are trying to do something that you don't get, to stop and understand what they get from doing that. One of my sons used to spend more time not doing their homework than doing their homework. All right. And what they got from that was they avoided being judged. They were worried they were wrong. And so dealing with the fear of being wrong helped them get their homework done. And so, you know, with your staff, it's the same thing. Why can't they just do this? What is it they're getting by not facing up that this number's crap? Well, they don't want to face up to the failure. They've got imposter syndrome. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about an error is when it looked like the right decision, turned out later it wasn't. Mistakes, you repeated an error. Errors are fine. You have to have an error rate, or you're taking too long to make your decisions. Mistakes, hard. Shouldn't be making mistakes. Mistakes are bad. I made 3 mistakes at Cloudability, and that probably took $1 billion off our valuation when we sold. Okay, that's down to me. That's my learning. Okay, so normalizing that. And what we would do at Cloudy was we modeled that behavior by owning our mistakes as much as we could. And the best thing that could happen is when a member of staff challenged me in a productive way, and I went, you're right. Now you're training people to talk about the problems. And we didn't get there before we sold. We could have done more on difficult conversations and doing them better and more quickly and more regularly. But it really helped. It's a lot more work for the management to be sensitive to people's feelings and their own stories. And the outcome is a lot more cohesion and honesty, transparency, and I think better decisions. The last thing is that people who do it this way know that they're not the reason the company succeeded. So they're not on stage going, look what I did. I feel like our lowest paid employee was one of our receptionists. And if she had not been there, we might have lost key staff. I feel like even if she had left, we might have got there. All right. I've never been involved in the thing where I felt like we just made it. Like we could have failed at any point for this or that. And we just kind of flopped over the line, exhausted, got there. All right. So just understanding that the people, everyone has a contribution, everyone has a dark side, everyone needs help, everyone can help. And having that conversation in a productive way was challenging. It took a lot of my time and energy, and I felt it was very worth it. But it's the hard way. The easy way is to yell at people and ignore their feelings. So I think that's why we talk about it that way.
Well, so fascinating to hear someone with your experience talk about this kind of stuff this way. And it reminds me of and I won't say his name, but there's a very successful founder in Seattle who's working on his 3rd successful company. And he gave a talk. I was hosting some folks from Europe who came over and want to learn about how startups happen in the US. And he very graciously agreed to share the experience of being a founder. And particularly for him, someone who had some notoriety. And one of the things he shared was, you know, if you've done anything interesting, the expectations are very high for the next thing that you do. And if you're a founder and you have these fears that you have, and you have these drives that you have to overcome these things in your psyche, your background, your experience, like on top of that, the bar has now been set higher for you.
Yeah.
You're working on another company. I listened to you talk. I think, shit, like a guy with that take on startups, and we're barely scratching the surface on the things that you've experienced and understand. Like your next startup should be blisteringly successful. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to and I want to share with the folks listening too. I'm a customer. I heard you were doing this thing. I tried a few other kinds of things that were supposed to solve the problem. Never kind of got to the one that I wanted. I tried yours, and I'm not a good customer because I don't think I use it in all the ways that it can be used, but I use it to deaden the noise in my inbox.
Right.
And on certain days, I'm shocked and I'm a little bit worried because I think, I just spent the last 20 years complaining about how I have 200 emails a day. Like, oh my God, it's so hard to be in the startup world. There's so much noise, and oh my God, and there'll be a day where I get 3 emails, and I think something must have gone wrong. Shit, what's happened? Is the email server down? Is 60 dumping a bunch of really important emails on me that I'm going to have to go dig up somewhere? And I'll do a minute of forensics, and I'll realize, shit, I had 3 emails I cared about today, and 60 found them and put them in my inbox. And so thank you for that tool, but share a little bit about what you're working on now.
Well, very briefly, I was at the launch of Windows 3.0. It was Wednesday, March the 10th, 1992. And they all gave us a free version of Windows 3, piles of diskettes like this, and a free version of Word for Windows. I was blown away. And I spent the next 8 years deploying that around the world. I loved it. An example of productivity gain, when we deployed it in 1995 to 8,000 employees in Europe, within 6 months, every printer had died because we were literally printing out 10 times as much stuff as we were before, right? So early on, these tools are really successful in massively improving productivity. Anyone's used a spreadsheet, how different it is versus doing it on paper, okay? But in the last 15 or 20 years, it started to take us over, and the mobile comms has made this worse, right? So we never have enough time. There's always something more to do. There's no downtime. There's no escape. There's no end. We have too many messages to get on top of. We have too many meetings to prepare for and follow up. We have too many people. I have 15,000 people in my Rolodex alone. And we have too many alerts. I can't tell you how many people alert me right now. England's playing Holland in the semi-finals.
My phone just went off just now.
Right. And people expect a response instantly. Now, I can't work on interrupt driven. I need to focus. And every time you interrupt someone, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. You can get back to the jigsaw puzzle, but all the bits that are still on the table, you've forgotten where they are. All right. And so what we've done at 60 is we've built an AI time machine where we're using AI to understand how well you know people so that we can bring important things up and push less important things down. And the way we do it for you is your inbox. So we make sure that your inbox only has people you know that you want to be in the inbox, and all your reading material goes over here and all your noise goes over there. And new people go into an outsiders folder where you can kind of decide where they go and deal with that when you want. We've also got, I like this, I use this a lot. We have a thing called Yesterday's Inbox where you can read all the email up to midnight last night, which means that when you're clearing your inbox, you're not getting distracted by the responses, which is actually harder to do. So it's like when you write emails, your reward is another email. So, but we also do this for your agendas. We help prioritize your meetings. We provide briefings for you to share with others and encourage them to share them with you. And we help you follow up so that you can remember what they said they do, what you said you do, things about them. So you go into the next meeting with them with a summary of what you've been talking about between and what you had in the last meetings. We even help you stay in touch with your birthdays and things like this. And the goal here is just to make the computers work for us. AI is changing a lot of things. I think there's a lot of bullshit around it, frankly. But what's going on now is if you are doing something a computer can do, you're in trouble. You've got to find a way to have the computers work for you, and having them filter through things like meetings and emails and contacts and understand just how close you are to them based on how much you talk to them and your meetings you have with them is an important skill. Every time you pick up an email, you're asking, who is this person and do I have to respond? Do I have to do what they're asking? And then you decide, what do I do? And that's hard on us. And we're only designed to deal with a few hundred people. And we're now dealing with thousands of people, and just helping us kind of augment our brains a little bit so we can stay in touch with people better. We can remember things about them more. We can focus on the emails that count, the messages that count, the meetings that count is important. The other side of this is too many of these apps they need another app. They change how you work. They require lots of time and attention. We call it the business 60 because we never ask you to do anything that takes longer than 60 seconds. So a typical day, you wake up, You check out your agenda. It's been pared down to the meetings that matter with briefings. 60-second check. You go to your inbox. It's much smaller. 60-second check. Before the meeting, check out the briefing. 60 seconds. After the meeting, do the follow-up. Just talk into the phone, and we'll take the details down. We'll sort them out for you. 60 seconds. And so it's all just 6 seconds of time. No new apps, and we're not bouncing into paying for it. You can pay us if you want more data around birthdays and you want no logos, because all of our stuff has our data, our stuff on it. And you can buy a version for your company, so you don't get to see your emails. And later you'll be able to buy introductions beyond the ones you get for free. But what we want is a product that's focused on the end user. We want to make productivity software productive again, so you can take back your time, do things that humans only can do, and have the things that computers can do them for you instead. So you can sign up at 60.app. It's still a very early product. There's lots of rough edges. We love feedback. What we like talking to our users. And as Bob said, if all it does is make your inbox smaller, great. Just use that. Lots of features coming this summer, and you'll hear more about it if you're a user.
Well, I'm going to spend 60 seconds after we're done here. I'm going to go check out some more of the stuff that I know I'm not leveraging. Well, so Matt, this has been tremendous. I get just a couple questions. There's a couple questions in the Q&A that I want to respect our attendees. So one of them comes from Guinevere. She's in Denver, founder and investor. And she was very impressed with your website and the way that you constructed your messaging. And she wants to know, like, what inspired that, and help her understand how you were able, and you do, if you go to the 60.app website, you're greeted with these, oh my God, you get it right. Like, oh my God, I don't have to read anything, and I understand what you're trying to do. Can you share a little bit about how you landed there and what your thought process was?
It's been difficult to raise enough money to fulfill this idea, but we started trying to build a brand, a movement around taking back your time, because that's what we're trying to help you do. I'm trying to reclaim the time. Every time you're interrupted, someone else is rudely stealing a few moments of your focus and energy from you. I'm dealing with this crazy doctor surgery, and all they want to do is talk to me on the phone. Like, you know what I'm doing when you call me? Something else 100% of the time. But these alerts are no different. And so, we're really focused on that. We did a bunch of surveys. So we found out that 85% of people feel overwhelmed by their technology. We also found that a lot of technology is built for a male audience, a male tech audience, and actually changing the message to appeal to a broader group, particularly to female entrepreneurs, solo business owners. It landed much harder because they seem to feel the stress more about this pressure and of not responding thoughtfully. And so, we're always looking for a beachhead as a startup. So our focus right now is on female entrepreneurs, not just female, but it appeals more to female, but business owners, solos, small companies who are trying to reconnect with their customers and trying to get more business from their existing customers, almost like a mini CRM. And that's where that mission comes from. We also had a great marketing guy who lives in Seattle, a guy called Jay Wampold. Jay's the guy who made DevOps popular. He didn't create it. And then when he came to Cloudability, he named what we did FinOps. And today, there are 100,000 people that name the word FinOps in their job title. He's a very good marketer, one of the best I've worked with, and he led that work.
Well, he might get pinged by a few people.
He's very good. Yeah.
Or listening. And thank you so much for your time. I just want to share this one last thing with you. Yeah. You won't remember. Well, you might remember this. I came down there for an event, and for the record, Matt and Cloudability had this sort of storied building in this, I don't know, blessed or cursed or interesting things started happened in this building.
Yeah.
And it had this tremendous open space, and Matt very graciously made that available to the community, made it available to us. We hosted almost all of our events there at the Cloudability space. And when you mentioned your receptionist, I remember I came down, and your receptionist, the door was locked. She was very gracious, but she was careful. Like, she's not just let anybody in. And I explained kind of who I was, what I'm doing. She thought about it for a second, and she believed me, so she let me in. And while I was there, I said, you had a shelf full of T-shirts, and almost like you're in the office, grab a T-shirt, right? And I grabbed a T-shirt, and I thought for a minute about wearing it today. It's the most comfortable t-shirt, and I wear it all the
Everyone
time.
tells us that. Yeah.
And you have a great you had a great logo. Like I just want to give you kudos for doing a good job on a t-shirt and making it available in the lobby.
So
I
a
gave
little story on that. But that was all JR and Alex. So our early designer is Alex Billmates, who's now the CEO at Endgame. JR is the president of the FinOps Foundation. And he's the guy who gave us our cool. And Alex was the guy who could turn it into cool. So JR knew what was cool. He just had this vibe about him. And Alex could go, yeah, we'll do a 3-point small curve on that button thing, right? So our first t-shirt was terrible. And basically they were working on it to get it better and better. And that logo cost us $99 on a thing where, you know, people compete to get your logo.
Signs or whatever that was.
Yeah, something like that. But the point was, we had this big event in California in our first year, and I needed the t-shirts. And I'd asked them about this. Eventually, they just stopped responding to me. So at the last possible minute, I took the latest design, put it on a t-shirt, and they freaked out. They go, "You can't do that." I'm like, "Well, we can't not give out t-shirts." And they said, "It's not ready yet." And this is creative people. It's ready when it's ready, all right? You can't rush it, right? And 2 weeks after that show, we came up with the t-shirt you're talking about. JR very carefully picked out the right fabric. We spent more on it. They're American apparel. We gave out 50,000 of those t-shirts in 8 years. And to this day, I keep getting sent random photos and encouragement. There's a guy in Vietnam being interviewed on the TV about his restaurant wearing a Cloudability t-shirt. 2 students on TV because someone broke into their high school and stole it, Cloudability t-shirt. A friend of mine who's a teacher in Northern England, one of the kids turns up in her class, Cloudability t-shirt. She asked him, "Where'd you get that?" Because my dad went to a conference. "What do you think it's about?" "Oh, it's about yoga." Those t-shirts, they really helped build our brand. It was all JR. The only thing I did was approve the extra expense.
Well, I got to say, that's a unique story. I don't know another startup who's had that trajectory of their t-shirt.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah, well, and thank you for sort of validating me, because I felt like I'm a little bit embarrassed to bring up a freaking t-shirt. This is Mat Ellis. Why am I talking about t-shirt? But it really was a standout t-shirt. I still have it. I got 2 for my daughters on a subsequent trip.
Just for the audience, there were a couple other things that worked well here. We were the first to introduce female size instead of just straight. We had female ones. We also were the first to involve large sizes. And they were so popular that when we ran out, we'd have a form you could fill in, so we'd mail you one, because we didn't have thousands of 4XLs or 3XLs. So people felt that we could communicate, we cared about you as a customer. But the last one was, you know, at the trade shows, we give out so many that Amazon used to have this annual, they still have this annual event called re:Event, and we were usually a top sponsor. And there's a party on the last night. One year, we had so many people in t-shirts at that party, the third-party commentators were saying, Amazon must be pissed. Anyone who goes here would think this is the Cloudability party, not the Amazon party. Because like 1 in 3 of the people at that thing were wearing one of our shirts. It was incredible. Anyway, so good t-shirts are a great investment for a startup, a really good one.
I love that. Well, I'm grateful that I have a couple left. Thank you, Matt. This is tremendous. Thank you so much for all that you do to help founders, and for your honesty and just, you know, your emotional attachment to what you do and the people that you work with and to the ecosystem broadly is palpable, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you, sir.
It's great to be here. And by the way, we couldn't have done it without help from people like you and Rick and all the other entrepreneurs who led the way, made introductions, fed us staff, fed us sales leads, shared their war stories. It's a village. You've got to work with everyone else, and so this is a little tiny bit of paying back all the help we got. It's really fun to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.